Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This will be a quick one. We're going to start with the 27mm lug nut covers. Just take them off by hand. We have 22mm lug nuts. Just zip them off with some air tools if you've got those. And I'm going to be using a lift with some jack stands. There are 3 bolts we need to get off. This is at the top of the strut. These are 18mm each. There are 3 of them. Here at the bottom, these are 15mm. I'm using just my air ratchet to get these off. These will commonly break on you. Hopefully your kit came with extra so you don't have to worry about that. Next we have these sway bar links. These are going to be 15mm. These also can be a bugger to get off. I ended up having to spray mine with penetrating oil and then even grabbing a torch, and they may break as well. You can see how you just lower them through the bottom. Next we have our ball joint. This is a 24mm. On this one you have a cotter pin that needs to come out before you can loosen that, and in my case, after I removed that cotter pin, mine just came off by hand. To get the axle nut off, you're going to need a 35mm. I rented this from a local auto parts store, and Impact's going to make this really easy. The next step on the other side of the axle are these flange bolts. There's 6 of them, and these are all going to be 15mm flange bolts. You can see I just use a wobble head extension and I zip them out of there. It's also worth noting, if you are only replacing your strut, you don't need to take out the axle. We're only taking out the axle because it leaves space for our control arm to come out, and of course we need to take out the shock with that. And you can see I'm pushing down on the control arm to get a little bit of space so that strut will come right out of there. Now to get the rest of this axle out, you can see I push that down out of the way, and we're going to need to slide it towards the engine. And in order to do that, you may need to take a dead blow hammer to the front of this. If you do take a dead blow hammer, make sure you have that nut on there so you don't damage the threads. And once you have it far enough out, you should be able to slide that on out. I'm just taking a hammer and tapping that ball joint up out of the way. I'm not worried about damaging the threads just because we're replacing that. And we've got the control arm bolts now. They are an 18mm and a 24mm. So one is larger on the other side. You can do that by hand, or you can see here I just zipped them off with the impact. Makes it a lot easier. I'm just removing these the rest of the way. If your lower control arm comes with a grease fitting, now would be the time to install it. You won't be able to get a chance later just because the axle interferes with it. So I'm just putting it kind of in the rear direction here, and then make sure you grease it because there's probably not going to be much grease from the factory. And you just grease it until the bottom of it starts bulging, and you'll see here in a second how you've got enough grease where it's popping out of that seal there. So that's how you know you've gotten enough in there. With those bolts out of the control arms, now you should be able to slide this out. Sometimes it takes a little finesse to get it out. Make sure that ball joint is also completely disconnected so you don't hang up on that. And now I'm putting in the new one. These bolts, when you put them back in, make sure they go from front to rear. As you can see here, the bolt head is there, the nut is on the rear of the vehicle, or rear side of the vehicle. Now I'm adding the nut onto the ball joint. I'm just keeping it kind of loose for now while I put everything else in. You may need to throw a little bit of WD-40 onto this axle to get it fit in all the way, but once it's in, you can pull up and get that axle flange back in place as well. And here's our new strut. You can see the bottom of it is going to be parallel with the frame. There's these 3 studs that are going to be at the top. Make sure the middle stud is facing towards you. And I have to push a little bit on that control arm. Here's some new hardware. if your kit came with it. Go ahead and loosely place those 3 nuts on the top. So for this install, we are not going to be replacing the upper control arm. However, this would be the time to do it if you were. It's basically the same as the bottom. You can see your 2 bolts and nuts there. This little slider thing, that is a camber bolt, which means if you don't get it lined up exactly, you're going to have to be doing a new alignment. Then you have that little clip there that needs to be taken off, and then there's your ball joint. So basically the same process. Back to the bottom of the strut, here's our new bolt I'm going to be putting in. It comes in from the bottom up. And then I'm going to be adding our 6 bolts back to our axle flange. I'm also going to be adding our axle nut back on there. I'll be having all the torque specs here in a minute once I tighten everything up. Make sure you get your washer onto your axle nut. And then finally we have our sway links. You can see how I'm installing it from the bottom up as well. To tighten your ball joint, sometimes it's a little tricky because the inside will want to spin on you. As you torque this down, you can see that inner piece can spin. So you can grab an Allen wrench and set that in there while you tighten it, and that'll keep it from spinning. And finally we have our torque specs. Understand, because this is suspension, you should probably recheck your torque after a few miles of driving, because things may loosen up on you, especially with new control arms and new bushings in there. But we'll start with the upper strut mounts, and those are going to be 37 foot-pounds, as well as the lower strut mounts as well. Those are going to be 37 foot-pounds. Your sway bar end links are going to be 17 foot-pounds. Your control arms are 129 foot-pounds. Your ball joint is going to be 92 foot-pounds. Your axle nut is 177 foot-pounds. And your axle flange bolts are 58 foot-pounds. Your lug nuts, read your owner's manual because they may vary, but they typically are between 100 and 140. And then don't forget your 27mm lug nut covers. And then just do a quick once over, make sure you've checked everything. Again, retorque everything after a few miles. And that's everything I have for you for this video. Thanks for supporting the channel. See you next time.